All right, here we are. We're back. It is a beautiful, beautiful Monday. The weather is amazing. So, good afternoon to everybody who's tuned in. There's a lot of really exciting things to talk about today, and we're going to dive into them soon. But first, we want to give a shout out to our top sponsor for now. Soon more to come. We just got our 501c3 in place, so we're looking for a whole lot more opportunities that are potentially coming our way. But as of right now, we wanted to say thank you to FPEA for being with us on this wild ride and the oh so many things going on in the home education community, especially the convention that's coming up. We're all excited about being there and looking forward to that. Let's see here. All right, we're in. Oh, people's heads have moved around. Pardon me while I do some reconstruction. All right, here we go. Looks like there. All right. Well, Brenda, it's Monday,
It's Monday
and
afternoon.
it is Monday afternoon. Um, a lot is on the plate. So before we jump in and kind of talk about kind of the wrap up or what it is, I'd like to kind of talk about at least a little bit what some of the things were that we were watching at the beginning of legislative session, what kind of took over as the core focus and why, and then kind of what's coming next. So I'd like to kind of hit it in those ways as we move forward. But before we do that, give us a check-in with where we are in the process now. What we've seen the votes come through with HB 1403, 49, 1569, and like tons of other bills that we were watching that impact home education families. Where are in general, as this session is wrapping up and has wrapped up, where do things sit?
Well, I have not checked this morning, but 1403 was enrolled and sent to the governor's office. And the next step is for the governor to sign the bill or let it go into law without his signature.
Okay.
So it takes a few days to get everything, the process to make sure the bill is in the right format, all that before it leaves the legislature. So I'm not sure where it is in the process right now.
Okay, but sitting with the governor, waiting to be
It
signed.
either is or will be soon.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Okay.
after session, he has 14 days to make a decision on the bill,
Okay.
but he may sign it sooner than that.
Got you. Well, that is what we're watching for then.
Right.
I'm chomping at the bit to get to something.
Yes, a
It's
surprise.
wild. An absolute surprise. I haven't told Brenda what this thing is yet. So let's just roll through the normal conversation and then I'll hit you with it. So Brenda, when we first started legislative session, um, what were some of the things, just talk to our audience, what were some of the things that we were looking at? We knew there was a glitch bill coming. We knew that with PEP, there were certain things they're going to want to focus on. But let's stepping back to HEF as a whole. What were some of the things that we were looking for in this legislative session as we comb through the bills?
You mean as related to 1403?
No, more in general, bigger picture. What are some of the things that we watch for? And then, of course, as we saw things in some of the bills, we started to narrow our focus. And there are certain things that you have on your heart that are important for the home education community. So we were looking for some very specific things and opportunities there as well. Just kind of talk about what some of those are.
Well, the first thing we need to do is watch all the legislation and make sure that nothing is happening that's going to affect home education students or even just any students that are outside of the public school system. So I like to think that we watch all of the non-public school options for parents. And that involves kind of tracking certain bills, and you can tell by some of the signs which ones are going to move and which ones aren't going to move. There was a bill to extend the age for being able to drop out of school, which is 16 now. But based on several factors, we didn't think that was going anywhere, which it didn't. So, we watch things, and then we watch whether they're moving or not. We look at which committees they're assigned to, because one of the things we can tell is if it's assigned to 3 or 4 committees, we know chances are they don't want that bill to pass. So it kind of goes on the back burner. Like you said, we knew there would be a glitch bill from last year. There were some issues that needed to be addressed, which didn't get addressed in this bill, unfortunately. So we had a list of about 5 things we wanted to try to get in the bill. And as I told Jason, after the session is over, it's kind of like a flush my brain. And you should have asked me ahead of time, because I couldn't even tell you what the 5 things are. The one I remember, we kept cutting them off as we went through committee meetings because we knew it wasn't going to pass. But one of the things I asked for at the very end, and I thought it might get in the negotiations between the House and the Senate, was to require the school districts to create a contract with the SFOs, because students were being denied access for classes they needed to take. One particular one where you can't get it anywhere else is ROTC. And a child had been in ROTC for 2 years, and there are ways of getting scholarships and boost for college if you stay in the program. But the school district would not allow him to enroll, and said he either had to give up the scholarship or go back into home education. So, well, that would have been a both, and go back into home education. I don't know what the parent decided on that, but we wanted to make sure that the districts were required to create a contract. The problem is the funding issue. It's kind of a complicated process. The DOE would have to come up with a code in the computer for the districts to put the children who are on scholarships into their system. Then the people who do the school funding at the district would have to figure out how much each class costs them to assign an amount that the PEP students would pay the school district. And school districts are not really set up to take private money. FLVS is, but the school districts are not. So we needed some help from the legislature to force the DOE to do something, to force the school districts to do something, but they didn't want to deal with any of those issues this session.
We had a definition for home education instructional programs that Brenda, you worked on 6+ months last year.
Yes.
And the mention of home education instructional programs is in statute, but the definition is not. So when it comes to, well, what is that? We really kind of rely on the guide, Step Up for Students' purchasing guide, for that information, because that's where it's housed, because it didn't make it into statute. So we were looking to get that put into statute so that it could be more well-defined and protected. I think you have a really interesting philosophy about when things are defined and mentioned in statute, they're protected. Certainly, it then introduces well, this is this thing and not that thing, so it can be seen as a restriction if you want to look at it that way. But ultimately, there's a very real need for definitions. so that we understand what things are what, how they go where, what can fund them and what can't, and what lane they're in and not in, and all those things kind of matter. We have many other definitions that we were also the programs are in need of. And it kind of something that kind of dawned on me as we were working together, and I'm start to learn more about how all the families home educate and how they piece it together. And there's a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of how it was handled in the legislation and in the statutes. And it's dawned on me that, there are some very real needs for some definitions for things. Even the latest amendment to 1403 that included hybrids or blendeds. I keep asking, well, what's a hybrid and what's a blended and what's the difference? And I get different answers just depending on who I ask. So I think there's a very real need for getting some of these things at least introduced and defined so that we know, what is something and what isn't. Those are some of the things that we were thinking about, at least the home education instructional program definition that already exists in the purchasing guide. Putting that in statute was one of the things we were looking for. I know, Brenda, you had mentioned later in sessions that there was something for UA that you had as a focus when it comes to the levels and the assessments and trying to increase the funding that comes for that. Many of the things that we were looking at and hoping we would have an opportunity to lobby for and introduce just ended up in the gutter. And it isn't because we didn't talk about them. It's because the only thing anyone wanted to talk about when we met with them was the PEP scholarship and the instructional materials and this big hairy problem that they felt that they had to solve. And they wanted to take an axe to home education, the one program that they all saw, all the legislators see PEP as a scholarship for home education families. That was how it was introduced. That's how they all look at it. We can talk about what it is or isn't in statute and how it's defined and whatever till we're blue in the face, but all of the legislators see it as a home education scholarship. So they wanted to reel in these home education families. They wanted to do something about that. And that kind of took, in our minds, took precedent because it's the one piece that they were fighting the hardest for as well. And in speaking with them, we would only have a matter of minutes sometimes. And so getting into any of the weeds on any of these issues are very complex. There's a lot of moving parts. We just they wouldn't give us the time for that. They wouldn't give us the space. They would barely even give us the time of day to talk about PEP and what was the real issue that was going on there. And this is where I'm going to drop the bomb. If you're ready. I listened to the debates. And I didn't capture all of the debates in the YouTube video that I made where they made the announcement for the amendment for 1403 and they were passing it. I just wanted to kind of capture that moment, put it on YouTube and let everybody can see it and share it. But I watched the debates and it was very interesting to watch them come after home education families and their Facebook groups and the content that they post and these outrageous purchases. Brenda, where were we February 20th? Do you remember?
I don't.
What's a good guess? What's a good guess as to where we were during February?
Tell me what day of the week it was. I lose all track of times and dates during session.
It was a Tuesday. Middle of February, Tuesday. It's safe to say.
In the Capitol. Were we on our way to the Senate?
There's a chance that we were. Or it might have been a day where we're on calls all day fighting over this language. Do you want to know what's really interesting?
What?
There's an article. There was an article that went live and was published February 20th this year. And the article says Leon County's first ever school esports lab, NIMS Middle School. So NIMS Middle School is in the middle of, they're announcing that they're so proud of this $8 million renovation project that's going to include a new cafeteria and a gym and an esports lab. If you don't know what an esports lab is, Brenda, this is my world.
I know.
An esports lab is a giant room where they have enough computers put together where at least one team can form, but possibly two teams, so they could curate matches and play against one another. It's not the same as a computer lab. It's essentially an esports. It's a gaming lab. So we're talking gaming chairs, gaming laptops, the high end type stuff. And I found it really interesting that in the middle of us arguing with people about, well, public school kids don't get this and public school kids don't get that.
And we were begging for computers for PEP students.
But lo and behold, they're building an esports lab in a public school. Dun, dun, dun.
So next year we can say, well, public school
Oh, my
students
word.
have gaming rooms.
If it is not the pot calling the kettle, is it jealousy? Is it like, is there this sense of like, oh, home education families don't have to sit in these rooms all day and they have all this freedom? Like, help me understand. I know there's a million moving parts. Teachers unions, teachers want to keep their jobs. So anything that threatens that, like home education, is a no-no. It's bad. They're always going to be against it. There's a lot of money in education in the state in general. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that education is the largest budget item in Florida, and it's the biggest part of Florida's quote economy. I think tourism is actually second to education in the state. So I understand that defunding it or dismantling it or whatever, I understand how any little bit of money that the taxpayers are taken from the taxpayers that doesn't come to education somehow seems like it's robbing the system. And that's the way that they look at PEP. But isn't it absurd just a little bit to sit here and talk about all the things that we don't want home education families to spend their money on? Hydroponic gardens, hiking equipment. Home education families could go and hike through the trails for a month and take samples of trees and creatures, and it's an experience that they can do. They have the freedom to be able to do, and it would be a well spent amount of money for them to be able to do that. And they're arguing till they're blue in the face. Meanwhile, they're building a gaming lab in a public school. Like, what?
But guess what?
I gotta take
can
that
learn
in
a
for
lot
minute.
from that.
Okay, listen, I'm with you. I am with you on that. Now, so here's the deal. I read the article and they interviewed some of the students and all this kind of stuff. And the kids were excited, right? This one kid said, I have no doubt it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. He's into Madden NFL and NBA 2K and he plays Call of Duty. I'm like, these are not educational games. And I'm not one of these people, by the way. Just I taught a lot of our kids how to read by beating them in video games. I remember when Aurora was younger, I would play video games with her and I would beat her mercilessly. And she would cry and complain. And then I'm like, well, the screen told you what to do. If you would read it, you would learn how to beat me. And so she got angry and she can tear through books. She can tear through books. I think she was 9 or 10 years old and reading on a 12th grade reading level. The kid's amazing. And I think gaming has a lot of potential to teach children things. I think there's a huge amount of potential for esports and things like that to teach them teamwork and all kinds of things. But these aren't educational games. Like there's very little educational value to these. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, all the games should be boring math games or all the games should be teaching you how to code or this and that and the other. There's a lot there's a lot to be gained through games that are adventure games, problem solving, these puzzles that you come across in a dungeon and you have to solve it before getting out. There's a lot of like mental effort, focus, critical thinking. There are a lot of games that supply that, not these. if I could be a game snob for a moment. But to be building this in a public school, meanwhile, we're arguing that, you know, home education families shouldn't be able to spend their scholarship on an harmonica or paintbrushes.
Or a computer.
It just, or a computer. Yeah. It highlights even more the absurdity of that mindset. And it's a very real challenge. A very real challenge. I think that as we move forward, the conversation and the lobbying efforts really have to center on differentiating home education and public school ideologically and philosophically, because to compare home education and public schooling, they're not the same. And many of the legislators just think mentally, the picture in their head is, yes, school, that's where kids should be, school, but you can do school at home. And they think public school at home, and it's not. It's not. It's not, and that really needs to be a very clear and resounding message that we put out together. And this is one of the reasons why I sue for I sue for peace and unity all the time on our podcasts among the home education families, because we can tear each other apart, but meanwhile, the people who don't know us, that don't want to see us doing any of these things, they don't get it. They don't get it, and they don't care that we have our freedoms. They'd be just as happy as if we were in there pledging allegiance to any of the other flags. They don't mind flying in those places. So, anyway, I'm off my soapbox. There's my bomb. I have dropped it. What do you want to say?
I think, in a way, over the years, the legislators, without realizing it, are trying to make public schools more like home education.
Yes.
But they don't realize that's what they're doing.
They don't even know that they're doing
They
it.
want to take them out of the seats and let them do other things besides sit at a desk for 6 hours a day. So they like the flexibility of home education, but they don't want parents to have the control. They want to be in control. And part of that are the Carnegie credits for high school. Part of that is the law that says they have to have 170 hours of instruction during, elementary school, high school. I think the numbers are 570 instructional hours for elementary school. Middle school has more, and then high school has 900 hours. I think middle school is 720 instructional hours. But there's more ways to instruct than a teacher standing in front of the classroom lecturing. And so when we built the home education law, we argued for no times. And people had a hard time grasping that. And what we kept telling them is education takes place all day. Most of our education takes place after daddy gets home from work.
Oh my goodness, my kids would agree with you. They're like, it happens all day. They're like, do you guys take summer vacation?
No, ours didn't even know that there was such a thing until they were in about 6th grade. And they said, well, can we take the summers off? No. Because you live in our household, we're learning all the time. You don't take summers off.
Yeah, man. Crystal, what were you gonna say? You kind of cut out.
I just said you're big on teachable moments. So there really is not. There's not anything that happens in our household that doesn't get analyzed into some sort of teachable moment. Like literally anything that really happens.
Yeah.
I was that person in our household because I was there. But, we go on camping trips and we studied geology. We'd go out and pick up rocks and determine what kind of rocks they were. We would go to the museums all around the campgrounds. Yeah. And my children are like, oh my gosh, Mom, can we just go someplace and have fun?
Yeah. Does everything have to be a teachable moment? I'm like, actually, do you see how the gas needle is at half? If we plan effectively and we do this, and think about the budget. Do you know how much money we spend on? Yes. Oh, maybe I do it too much. But I do think, and I have been wanting to do like a YouTube channel about how to teach through gaming for a long time. I just, it's a time thing. That's more of a passion project, and I just don't have time for passion when there's so much work to do. But it's a very real and valid method, but it's also something that people don't understand because there's no, like you said, there's no Carnegie credits for it. There's How do you measure the intelligence? Like, I don't know. When my daughter's 10 years old and she's reading on a 12th grade reading level, that's kind of cool. But, where are the as you go measurements? The moments where she's 5 years old and I'm doing that with her, and 6 years old, like, well, she wasn't reading at a 12th grade reading level then, so there you didn't have that measuring stick to go, this is working, keep doing. It's just dad is turning everything into a teachable moment, no holds barred. But it's valid, so I don't want to say public schools shouldn't be doing this. They should be. Great, good for them. Spend that money better. Spend that money in ways that the kids love the education they're getting. Unchain them from that seat and let them pursue all of the math through things they're actually passionate about. Let them pursue reasoning and critical thinking through the other stuff that they're passionate about. Let them build a mind that is curious and scientific and grows. Great, good for them. That's awesome. But stop poo-pooing on on PEP, and how parents are spending it, right? The freedoms and the ideas that home education families, I'm always amazed at the ways people come up with some of the ideas that they do. And I'm like, wow, that's actually really cool. There was one dad who I heard him say that I think there was like a chicken coop that they had that was messed up. And he was like, well, son, there's the problem. You have until 2 to fix it. I've got to go do this. Come back. We'll check your work when I come back. It's not like he just left it into the hands and entrusted it to that kid. And he was like, he was either going to pass or fail, and he didn't fail. But I also didn't give him any help. And it was a good moment where he learned, critical thinking. He had to apply experience and math, but it's a skill too. It's not just learning from a book. And I just thought it's great. Those kinds of experiences are fantastic, and they're few and far between when you look at public school. And that's why you can't compare home education and public schooling, because they're just not even close to the same thing. I don't want to argue right now over which one's better, because none of our home education families want to be tested and put in any kind of like space where they can collect data on us and put us in any kind of situation for that. So it's hard without the data to look at those things, but it's not hard when you look at where some of those people are. So anywho, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think people are more accepting of home education now than they were in 1985, obviously, because they were prosecuting families in 1985 for doing what we're doing now in an umbrella private school. Things have backed off a lot, but the issue comes when you're handing people money. And so that then brings another level of accountability that we didn't have in the home education program before they introduced this program. And in people's minds, in the legislature, we wanted Florida to be first, to have an educational savings account program that was unlimited. So they did that for private school people. And then it was, oh yeah, we need to give it to home education parents. They're really struggling. And all of a sudden we have money put into the home education program, which was going to bring about more accountability. So I'm so thankful that last year the legislators listened to us and separated the two programs. Many times they're the same people, but they're in a different program. So that level of accountability in the PEP program is something that we're going to have to constantly monitor.
Yes.
And we missed the bullet
Yes.
this year, but that doesn't mean that if people keep bragging about buying Pelotons and things
Certainly.
that are not reasonable in this
Quote unquote.
program, that there won't be more accountability next year. And so when you take government money, there's always going to be accountability. And
Yes.
and so that's where the dilemma comes. How much accountability are the legislators and the media and the teachers' unions going to demand from parents who take the scholarships through the PEP or even UA? Actually, the legislature tends to leave those programs that support parents with children with disabilities, tend to leave them alone because nobody wants to come after children with disabilities. But for the PEP program, it's going to be a constant monitoring. We hope that what the resolution ended up being this year, with the accountability being in the purchasing guide, will not affect parents individually or affect the program long range. But as long as we can keep the accountability out of the parents' home, that's what we want to try to do. And so hopefully the department is going to be sure that there's not items in the purchasing guide, although they weren't in the purchasing guide in the first place. But the media picked up on the Facebook discussions.
Well, if I could chime in, the media actually ran their article at the end of August when the money for PEP didn't drop until the end of September, early October. So all the purchases that they were talking about were not PEP purchases.
And the parents didn't have any money, so they had to purchase it out of their own money. I think hoping to get reimbursed for it, because there was no real set in stone purchasing guide. The scholarship programs were working very hard, the organizations, to try to define all this stuff. That's why definitions are so important. But they didn't have it in place until December 31st. So I think when people were saying they bought these items, they bought them out of their own pocket with the anticipation that they were going to get reimbursed, because there wasn't any money that was approved for a Peloton or what was the other thing? Paddle boards or
trampolines,
85-inch TVs or whatever. Those were really kind of like purchase that didn't even apply to those scholarship programs.
Well, there's a lot to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead. You haven't spoken.
I was just going to say that it's not just the actual purchases, it's also the perception that we're having to battle. So I found it interesting that some of the purchases that they brought up that maybe were reimbursed, I don't know. We never got like a breakdown from Step Up of what they actually reimbursed for any PEP parents. We were just dealing with the stories that were coming out in the news and what somebody had seen somewhere on Facebook, right? So the interesting thing for me, though, is that the legislators weren't upset at the SFOs for approving or reimbursing those. They were upset at the parents for even asking. Because I think that some of the posts were for things that probably in the end didn't actually get reimbursed. It was just the parents saying, hey, I purchased this. Do you think I can get this reimbursed? Because I saw a lot of those posts. So we're battling the perception of irresponsible spending, not necessarily the actuality of irresponsible spending.
Certainly.
So I think it's important to keep that in mind, because in the end, if you got something seemingly odd reimbursed, you probably had to make a good argument to Step Up for why that had educational benefit. There's a form for that you had to submit. But the Facebook posts aren't necessarily showing that reasoning, right? They're just showing the purchase and, hey, can I
Mm-hmm.
submit this for reimbursement? So I think it's just important for parents because, like Brenda said, when you're accepting funding, there's going to be a need for accountability. Um, just be aware that those types of posts are being watched, not necessarily directly by the legislators, but people are sharing them against group rules. They're
Mm-hmm.
screenshotting and sharing them out of the groups, and the news articles are picking them up, and all kinds of things. So just be aware that it's not just about the PEP purchases.
Yeah.
You're battling the perception of homeschooling and the legitimacy of homeschooling because,
Mm-hmm.
like Jason said, the legislators, even though in statute, home education and personalized education program are two separate tracks, the purpose of the scholarship was to give funding to homeschooling families, and all the legislators know that. So
Yeah.
we, in their minds, are all the same group. We are
Mm-hmm.
homeschoolers. Some of us took funding and some of us didn't, but we're all the same group.
Well,
So,
legally protected and separated out, though.
yes. So my concern is that if we are not careful with how we are presenting ourselves, because some of this is just about optics and perception,
Right.
we are going to lose credibility as a group before the legislators when we come forward to say, like, these are the things we're doing. They're going to be like, well, I don't care what you have to say. You just want to buy kayaks and big screen TVs.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that, I mean, if you're going to post about something you purchased, post the full reasoning, man. Show them how creative you're being with how you're using it. Show the educational
Yeah.
benefit of it. Show your kids thriving from it. You don't have to throttle back your creativity and how you're educating your children, but that's the side of the message that we need to be getting out is the
Yeah.
richness of the education we're providing
Yeah.
rather than the question of whether we're just trying to spend money on things that aren't really educational.
There's some
Certainly.
amazing stories out there, Jason, and we haven't posted yet the story that we videoed last year at the convention. But based on what that child was able to do with the
Sure.
benefits, and they didn't even have the opportunity to do what the PEP parents are doing now, but they were on UA, and the child was able, when he was told as at birth that that child would never be able to walk, that maybe he wouldn't even be able to sit up because of the parents' diligence in not accepting that diagnosis and giving up a career to work with this child. As a junior in high school and a senior, he was able to get into an exclusive yacht club sailing team, and the dream he had as a lifetime was to be able to sail. And so because of all of that work the parent put into it and the efforts of trying to get him in to fulfill his dream, the child was able to sail. And because of that, this exclusive yacht club decided they would create a club for students with disabilities to sail because there was such an advantage of letting them have the opportunity. There's a lot of learning in sailing. Oh my goodness, between
How dare they
weather.
spend money on sailboat equipment? Are you
Yeah,
kidding me? What an unreasonable purchase. Like,
exactly. And it's like, but we need to be sharing those kinds of stories and what the child was able to learn through sailing, nautical miles and weather and angles and nodding and
mobility.
I'm not a sailor,
Fine
but I
motor
know
skills
those.
when he was told he wouldn't walk. Like, what?
That, and like you mentioned about the chicken coop, it's a real life skill that he now
Yeah.
has that he
So I
can
want
use
to,
into the
And
future.
problem solving.
Yeah.
yeah, I want
Life
to
is
pivot.
full of problems. We need to figure out how to solve them.
Yes. I want to pivot because what you brought up with this example is the funding, a lot of the funding, the rationale for its spending is how does it test and how do we test and what does that come back as? Well, then that money was well spent. But the truth is, the best money that you can spend on education in your home or in the public schools is on things that the child is motivated for. You amplify that, and then you start pouring in the educational materials that they need to also learn this and also learn that. But the focus is to harness what it is that motivates them. Find the thing they're passionate about and dump your money into that. If my kid was interested in sailing, it is not unreasonable to spend 100% of all of that money on that and let him dive in full stop and just go and learn and use what he's passionate about to experience all the other things that passion touches and grow in all the ways that passion touches. That's not a single penny misspent. And I think that's the issue. A lot of it's optics. Things seem unreasonable or seemingly odd purchases. To whom? To whom? People who are far, far away from who our kids are. They're sitting at a desk with no concept of what home education is and far, far away of who our kids are. It seems odd to them that someone would need this kind of purchase. It's important that we realize that it's always going to seem odd to people who are not involved in home education. That's just the reality of it. And the further that they get from home education, the less experience that they've had, the less conversations they've had with people who home educate. If they don't have any friends who home educate, they're not connected to them in any way, the more odd it's going to seem. That can't be the standard. We also have to be very careful that we don't create an us versus them mentality. We're like, oh, how dare the public schools get those gaming? That's not what I was meaning to say earlier, right? How dare they? It's one of those things where we should allow the kids to pursue their passions, and it's not unreasonable spending, especially if public schools are doing it. Then why are they, while they're doing it, saying home education families can't do this? It makes no sense, and we should always go in that direction. The one thing that I want to also say, then, as far as what Crystal was saying about the social media stuff, Facebook is not your inner circle. It is. I have this. I've lost a couple of friends over the last several years, so I've had to change who my inner circle is. Just lost them, and having to pivot from that inner circle people in my life, those people that you want to text when you're excited about something, or, oh my goodness, you won't believe what my kid just did. That was, oh, they did this thing, or, oh my goodness, this joke is funny. And there are people in our inner circles that we do that with. Facebook's not your inner circle, and it shouldn't be. And these Facebook groups, while they might be closed, they're not inner circles. And it's very important that sometimes the things that we're most excited about and most passionate about are shared with our inner circle. There is a time and place for those people that we need to see the kind of things and celebrate those moments with us. I get that. That's the thing Facebook does pretty well, is it lets us post stuff and then people like it and we go, oh yeah, they're with me. I get it. Isn't this so cool? And that's nice. But Facebook isn't your inner circle. There are a lot of people prowling and ready to use something against you when the moment is right. And your sharing may be innocent. It's not an odd purchase to you. It doesn't seem weird. It doesn't seem irresponsible. But to many people who don't like home education, they don't like the freedoms. They want to see the programs, the freedoms get called back or pushed back or go away, and how dare they take the money. They're just looking for a moment to do something like that. Brenda?
Well, I think it's time to shift on the Facebook pages from the negatives that are posted. And I'm not a Facebook person at all. I just know what other people have said. But a lot of that turns into a gripe session about Step Up is not paying on time. Step Up denied me this, blah, blah, blah. Instead, why don't you share the positive things you're doing with your children? And we taught all of our math until algebra with games. It was board games back then. And we built a series of games that taught different math concepts. So when Daddy came home from work and we had dinner, we played games. Well, the kids didn't know that was math. They just learned all the math, And if you can share those kinds of positive experiences with your Facebook quote unquote friends, then those people that are looking for problems are going to find all the wonderful things that are happening when parents are directing the education of their children. You won't be giving them any fodder to use against you.
Yeah. Delene makes a great point. She says, please do brag about every good thing that should be bragged about. My 8-year-old is reading National Geographic books as fast as I can give them to her. She saves them, makes notes on them. She makes pages of art and stories with them. Not financially possible without the scholarship for us this year. My 6-year-old is excelling at math curriculum. She loves math, question mark, exclamation point, only because I was able to pick her curriculum using the scholarship funds. She hated math last year. That's fantastic. I do think that those things are worth celebrating. Like Crystal says, give more context, right? Because it's very important that the impact, not just the stuff, not just the consumerism part of it, like what we bought and consumed, but the impact that came from that. It's critical. It's very critical. And whenever
and since they can't all come to Tallahassee to give their stories in committee, this is one way to share your story.
Yes. And you can post those in our forum too. If there's a story that you think is a epic moment or a noteworthy thing that you really want to share and you think might even help us when we sit down and have these conversations, by all means, please put them in our forum. We love seeing them and hearing them. We get really excited about that.
And you know what? Some of these legislators have Facebook pages. Join their Facebook page and say, with my scholarship, thank you so much for the scholarship. I was able to, and my child does, start educating them now.
Yeah, because they need to see, they don't have a way of conceptualizing what homeschooling looks like in their own minds because they're picturing, like Jason said, public school at home. The more that we can share those examples of how we're creatively and effectively and responsibly using the funds to educate our children in unconventional ways, the better that they'll be able to understand and be less resistant to giving parents the freedom to make those choices in the future, because we'll be providing a picture for them to have inside their minds of what it is we're doing and what it looks like. The same as when I brought my kids and they were like, wow, now this is real people. It's not just ink on paper, right? So they need to see those stories. I mean, I'm a storyteller, I'm an author, I write fiction, so I'm probably biased in this, but stories are the way that you reach people, that you touch people. They need to hear your stories. A list of your purchases is not the same as the stories of how you use those purchases to enrich your children's education. So.
Just be mindful that there are bad actors. I suspect that we might even have one in our comments right now who are going to take the brilliant ideas, like, a Facebook group that says, look what we did with our scholarship, and it celebrates those moments. That can very easily be hijacked, where people come in, post bogus stories, make it look stupid, screenshot it, and then send it on. I'm pretty sure we even had people from out of state, not even in Florida, not Florida residents, in these groups trolling around, screenshotting things, pretending to be a constituent, and then sending messages to legislators. Can you believe this? So I love the positive spirit, but just be aware that there are people who are doing not nice things. And Facebook isn't your inner circle of friends. It's a public forum. It's a publicly accessible content machine.
Let me throw one more thing out there.
Okay.
Because it's everybody's responsibility who's getting this money to educate legislators. And in my opinion, and through experience, the best way to educate them is to get involved in their campaigns, because you're doing them a favor And they're more willing to listen to you when you have a request or an objection to something if they know you personally. And
Absolutely.
so they need help upcoming elections, and your children can be the best testimony that you can give as they're out there working in the campaigns, helping a legislator who supports choice get elected. There are many Democrats that support choice, so they need your help. And you know, typically it's been the Republicans that have pushed through school choice, but because the families who were taking these initially were families of low income and minority students, they have seen the difference that choice has made for their kids. And they're big supporters. So we have bridges that we can build um, between legislators if we're not on the same page with them on every other
100%.
issue that comes up. But getting them to see your children and the benefits that it has given you is amazing. And you know, even now, working in a political campaign can be used as volunteer hours for Bright Futures. Right. So, beginning in ninth grade, you can get a lot of volunteer hours by working in a political campaign. And you know, how better could you learn if you're not in the Capitol all the time like we are? How better can you learn about government? By being around those people that talk about government, that talk about elections, that talk about issues related to the legislature. Our kids learned a heck of a lot about government by working in political campaigns. So I think it's a great summer school for your kids. And it will really build a lot of education for those legislators. They come in believing in home education and the way we have been given to educate our children and the freedom that we have. You've won over a vote. Imagine what would happen if our state was flooded with home education families working in political campaigns. We wouldn't have all these fights that we have in the Capitol because people don't understand. You have an opportunity to do that at home, and I suggest strongly that when these candidates declare their candidacy and you call them up and ask them, how do you stand on school choice? What are your thoughts? You can change their thoughts by educating them.
The last thing I want to say, because we're cutting close on time, so I think all of this is a very important conversation to have, and I think you're absolutely right about that. You mentioned earlier, like 30, maybe 40 minutes ago, but I want to go back to it. You mentioned that the legislators were keen on being first in Florida being first to do this, first to do that. And I just saw this morning that Alabama is doing something similar, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes,
and while I appreciate being first, this is not a sprint. And being the first does not make us the best. So we need to continue to watch what is happening, how it happens. We need to fight back the restrictions that we saw and the poor logic, the very, very poor logic, the quick knee jerk to put sweeping prohibitions in as a stopgap measure and then we'll revisit it. Nonsense. Absolutely no. We are blessed. I was going to say lucky, but I think we are just blessed that these restrictions went away the way that they did, that we had a victory here, because it's very important. This is not a sprint, and it shouldn't be treated as one. We shouldn't be rapid firing these solutions. We should be being thoughtful and, I don't know if I would say slow, but at least moderately paced so that we do it right. My grandpa used to say anything worth doing is worth doing right. I didn't really like my grandpa, but he was not wrong about that. And I think that that's critical here, that we continue to watch all of these things. People will say, well, why do you watch PEP so much and all this kind of stuff? Well, it matters. It matters because when you go to, there's a question here off topic, but it was But was it ever clarified where PEP students send their Bright Futures volunteer hours? If you go back to the handbook for Bright Futures that they updated on their website, Bright Futures and home education and PEP students are treated interchangeably. So whatever the information was that applied to home education families, you can assume that it applies to PEP because even Bright Futures has decided to treat them as interchangeable. The legislators look at PEP as a home education scholarship. And with all of these things, it's really important that we continue to watch, that we continue to have a presence, walking the halls. We had a day where every corner that we turned, we ran into somebody that didn't have a spot on their calendar for us for 3 weeks that we needed to talk to. And it was almost like a movie, a scene out of a movie where each moment we spoke with somebody and it was like, you know what, thank you so much for giving us your time. The next person walked around the corner. Like it was choreographed. Literally, it was like there was a camera somewhere and it was choreographed. And it was very, very interesting to see. These sweeping prohibitions getting removed and the status quo being maintained. All eyes are on this program because Florida is first, but we're not best. And we need to watch it very carefully to make sure that the freedoms are preserved. This kind of goes into the what we wanted, what took over and why, and then kind of what comes next. For us, it's about establishing a pathway and a response for freedoms. One of the things that I think is very important. You can look out for some of this from the Home Education Foundation as over the summer and throughout the rest of this year, we put out content and information. We're looking to establish a thoughtful responses and a pathway to freedom so that as we communicate, when we communicate, we all have similar things that we can say and we go, hey, we've thought about that and here's a good response to that. Mr. Representative, who's my representative, whenever that question comes up. A lot of the times these media would raise questions and they don't know how to answer them. But if we're working alongside of them, we're there with them, and we know the things to say, or oh yeah, the Home Education Foundation told us about that, and we have this is what's important, and there's a lot of information. I'm not saying let us do the thinking for you, but there's a lot of information we're looking to share as we move forward that will help fill some of those gaps and allow us to create a unity of voice when it comes to protecting our freedoms. We're also building our community online. So the forum is going to grow. There's more information that's going to be coming there. I think that it's really important that we also share good information when it comes. The thing that makes the media so powerful in these moments is they print an article and then everybody who's in alignment with where that article came from, whether it's this leaning article or that leaning article, they all start sharing it because it matters to them. Like, oh my goodness, can you believe this and that? We have to also have ways of spreading our information. And I appreciate the Facebook groups. I appreciate all of the sharing that I've been seeing. I get to see when I would look at the insights, who's shared what we've done. I get to see the likes and stuff like that, but it actually gives me the names of people. And the pages and things like that when they're shared. And I want to tell you, I appreciate each and every one of you who shares our information. It matters immensely. This time last year, our reach and our visibility was relatively minuscule. And you have helped us grow that. And I applaud you and I thank you for all of the support that you've done, not just by going to the support page and helping us financially, but also by sharing the information that we put out. That's key, and I want to thank you for that. As we move forward and we lobby for freedoms for home education, PEP, UA families, there's a lot of other pathways to satisfy the attendance requirement that are coming for Florida. And there are a lot of other entities that are interested in finding a place where they fit in the statutes so that they can offer their programs and their options. And school choice and the expanding of options in school choice is what the Florida legislator is looking for. And so we're going to be watching those to make sure that, those freedoms stay intact. And there's a lot more, especially with trades and alternative certification routes and things like that are just huge, huge. And we're working on a lot of those. We love those. You'll start to see some of those as our brand kind of shifts as well. HEF Connect, we just got the 501c3 established, and name change set up. And so you're going to start to see some of those shifts and the community support amp up. And we just want to thank you all for being with us through all of this so far. And thank you for enduring our wrap-up podcast today. Brenda, I'm going to close this out, but is there anything you want to talk about or say or share?
I think we covered most of it.
I just have a quick thing I want to add.
Go ahead.
I am going to create a post in the UA section of our forum and also the PEP section, one in each, as a spot for you to drop your stories of ways that you've used the funding to really enrich your child's education. Because I would love to just have a spot that we can send people to go look. This is what families are doing with these scholarships.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead as soon as we get off this live stream, and I'm going to create a post under each of those in our forum for that.
Excellent idea. I don't have anything else on an agenda, and I don't see any comments that have come in to ask us for any information or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and call today to a close. And I want to thank everybody for being on our podcast today. And thank you for the support. We have seen even more support start to come in over the last couple of weeks. Continue to share this information. Continue to share our support page. I had somebody who was like, I was looking for how to support you, but I couldn't find it. I'm like, it says donate right there. Like there's a button. I've tried to make it as easy as possible, but there are so many ways that if you need help connecting with someone to try to help them get on board with supporting us because they can't figure it out or something like that to that effect, do not hesitate to reach out. I understand how to build all the tools and all that kind of stuff that we need. So just feel free to reach out and we can connect over that. As we bring today to a close, I want to go back and say thank you again to one of our top sponsors, FPEA, and Tracy from FPEA says thank you all. So what great timing that is. Thank you to FPEA for being one of our top sponsors and being with us through all of this. And I think without further ado or anything else to speak about, I'm going to call us to a close. You guys have a great day.